Welcome back, everyone, for another deep dive. This time, we're looking into Black high net worth consumers in the U.S. We found this pretty interesting study, and, well, it raised a few eyebrows around here.
Yeah, it really is a fascinating study. I mean, this is a demographic we don't often talk about, and some of the trends that are coming to light are pretty surprising.
Yeah, like the fact that those who work with financial advisors actually reported more financial stress than those without an advisor. Like, how does that even make sense?
Right.
But before we get into all that, I think we got to lay some groundwork. So, who are we talking about when we say high net worth in the context of this study?
Good question. So in this particular study, we're looking at Black Americans who are between 35 and 75. They have a household income of at least $75,000 and at least $150,000 in investable assets. So we're not talking about, the average person here, but a group that has some serious financial resources.
Okay, so they've got money to invest, and they're at a point in their lives where they're thinking about the future. So saving has got to be a top priority for them, right?
Oh, absolutely. And the study shows that saving is a huge focus for these individuals, regardless of whether or not they work with a financial professional.
Makes sense. Thinking about things like retirement or paying off debt, maybe even leaving a legacy behind.
You got it. And for almost everyone in this group, retirement savings is the #1 goal. But it's interesting because the specific goals that they prioritize change a little bit based on whether or not they actually work with a financial advisor.
Which brings us back to that head scratcher I mentioned before, right?
Yeah.
The folks with financial advisors, the ones who are presumably, more on top of their finances, are actually more stressed.
Yeah, you'd think having that advisor would lead to less stress, not more.
Right. I mean, they got a professional in their corner. You would think they'd feel pretty good about things.
Yeah, and in some ways they are more prepared. The study found that those working with advisors are more likely to have a written financial plan in place, especially the younger folks. But despite that, their reported stress levels are higher.
Huh. So maybe it's not just about, having a plan, but how that plan actually makes you feel. Maybe working with an advisor just makes you more aware of all the what ifs, the potential risks. So maybe they just worry more.
It's possible.
Mm-hmm.
Now, maybe the more engaged you are with your finances, the more you start to see all the different moving parts, all the things that could go wrong. It's like knowledge can be a double-edged sword, I guess.
Oh, so true. Ignorance is bliss and all that. But what about the people who aren't working with advisors? Where are they getting their information if they're not getting professional guidance?
Well, the study shows that their top sources are actually financial websites and online tools provided by financial institutions.
So they're doing their research online. That's pretty cool. They're taking the initiative. I wonder what they're looking for specifically, though.
It seems like they're interested in a wide range of topics, everything from basic budgeting and debt management to more complex investment strategies.
So they're really taking control of their financial education. Now, whether they have an advisor or not, there was one source of information that seemed pretty consistent for everyone in this group.
Oh, yeah, they're employer-sponsored retirement plan providers. That seems to be a go-to for both those with and without advisors, which I guess makes sense. They're already engaged with those providers, so it's a natural place to go for information.
Yeah. It's familiar, and hopefully there's a level of trust there already. Speaking of trust, how do these folks choose a financial advisor in the first place? I'm guessing trust is a pretty big factor.
Absolutely. The study found that when it comes to choosing an advisor, things like trust, transparency, and respect are non-negotiable for Black consumers. They want to feel confident that the advisor is on their side, that they're being treated fairly, and that their values are respected.
So it's about more than just numbers and spreadsheets. It's about building a relationship, one based on understanding and shared values. And, the study highlighted something else that was really important when choosing an advisor.
Oh yeah, shared racial and cultural background. This is a huge one and really sets this demographic apart. It's way more important to Black consumers than to non-Black consumers.
I mean, obviously you want someone who understands your financial goals, but it feels like it goes deeper than that. Like maybe they're looking for someone who understands their experiences, their values, their unique challenges.
It's about being seen and heard, having someone who gets where you're coming from. That can make a huge difference in building a strong, trusting relationship.
Someone who not only manages your money, but understands your story. I bet they aren't just jumping into the first advisor relationship they find. I bet they're taking their time and making sure it's the right fit.
Definitely. They're savvy consumers. They're more likely to interview multiple financial professionals before actually choosing one.
That's a good sign. They're asking the tough questions and really doing their homework.
It's a big decision. And they're approaching it seriously. which makes sense. But, it raises another question. Are they actually finding advisors who share their racial background? I mean, we've talked about how important that is, but is it the reality?
That's a great point. I mean, it's one thing to value it, but is it actually happening?
Well, it's interesting because the study found that Black consumers are actually less likely than non-Black consumers to have an advisor who shares their racial background.
Whoa, really? That's surprising, especially given how much they value that shared background.
Yeah, it's a pretty significant gap. And what's even more interesting is that this gap seems to get wider as people get older. So younger Black consumers are more likely to have an advisor who looks like them, but that likelihood decreases as they age.
Huh. That's pretty fascinating. Any idea what's driving that? Why are younger consumers having more success on that front?
It's tough to say for sure. But maybe there's a generational shift happening within the financial services industry. Maybe there's more diversity among younger financial professionals, which could be creating more options for Black consumers who are looking for someone who understands their background.
Right. So as the industry becomes more diverse, the pool of potential advisors who share their background grows, and that gives younger consumers more choice. But you have to wonder if younger Black consumers are just more proactive in seeking out advisors who really understand their needs and their experiences.
I think that's part of it, too. They may be more attuned to the importance of representation and more likely to actively search for advisors who align with their values.
So it could be a combination of things, more diverse advisors and a more proactive approach from younger consumers. Okay, but let's talk about the folks who aren't working with a financial advisor at all. What's holding them back? Is it just a matter of finding the right person, or are there other things at play?
Well, cost is a big one. The study found that for those who aren't currently working with an advisor, cost is a much bigger obstacle for Black consumers than for their non-Black counterparts.
That's really interesting. So even though they're clearly prioritizing saving and financial planning, cost might be the thing standing in the way of getting professional guidance.
Exactly. And this raises a really important question. Are financial services accessible enough for everyone? Or are cost barriers preventing certain groups, like Black consumers, from getting the support they need to reach their financial goals?
That's a huge question, and one I think deserves more attention. I mean, we're talking about financial well-being here, something that's essential for individuals, for families, for entire communities. If cost is a barrier, then what does that mean in the long run? What are the long-term implications? That's what I'm really curious about.
It's definitely something to think about. And luckily, this study gives us a lot to work with. But maybe that's a conversation for another time.
You're right. We've covered a lot already. We've talked about who these Black high net worth individuals are, what their top financial goals are, the role that financial advisors play in their lives, and the barriers they face when trying to get professional guidance. It's been a fascinating conversation so far. I can't believe how much we've already learned. Are you ready to dive even deeper?
I am. There's still so much more to uncover.
Great. We'll pick up right where we left off in the next part of our deep dive. Stay tuned.
Welcome back. We're going to pick up right where we left off looking at Black high net worth consumers in the U.S.
Yeah, we were talking about how financial services might not be as accessible to everyone as we might think, especially given what we saw in the study about cost being such a barrier for some.
And it brings us right back to that interesting finding about financial stress.
Mm.
Black high net worth individuals who actually work with financial advisors are reporting higher levels of stress, even though they're more prepared in a lot of ways.
Yeah, they've got their plans in place, they're working with the professionals, but they're still stressed. It's kind of a head scratcher, isn't it?
It is. It makes you think there's more to the story than just, having a budget or an investment portfolio.
Yeah.
Maybe we need to look at the bigger picture, the unique financial pressures and experiences that Black consumers often face.
Okay, so what kind of pressures are we talking about specifically?
Well, for starters, the racial wealth gap is huge. I mean, Black families in the U.S. just have significantly less wealth compared to white families, and that disparity can really weigh on individuals, even those considered high net worth.
So even when they're finding financial success, they're still carrying the weight of that historical and systemic inequality. It's like they're running a race, but they've got weights strapped to their ankles.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
And that takes a toll both financially and emotionally. And on top of that, you've got the issue of financial discrimination, which unfortunately is still a problem for a lot of Black consumers.
You mean like bias when they're trying to get a loan or get investment advice?
Exactly. Or even just interacting with financial institutions in general. Imagine constantly having to prove yourself or facing obstacles that other people don't, feeling like you're not taken seriously. That's going to add a ton of stress and anxiety, regardless of how much money you have.
It's like you're doing everything right, but the system is still working against you. That's so frustrating, and I can definitely see how that would contribute to financial stress.
Absolutely. And we can't forget about the cultural aspect either. In a lot of Black communities, there's a strong tradition of supporting family and sharing resources.
Right, lifting each other up and taking care of your own.
Exactly. And while that's a really beautiful thing, it can also add to the financial strain, especially when you combine that with the other pressures we've been talking about.
So you're working hard building your own financial security, but at the same time, you're also trying to help family members or maybe contribute to your community. That's a lot to balance, even if you are doing well financially.
For sure. It's a delicate balance, and it's something that financial advisors need to be really aware of when they're working with Black clients. You can't just focus on individual goals. You need to see the bigger picture, the context of family and community.
So it's not just about creating a budget, it's about understanding the whole person, their values, their background, the network of support that they're a part of.
Exactly. It's about providing financial advice that makes sense for their whole life.
Makes you wonder, though, are financial advisors even equipped to do that? I mean, it takes a lot of understanding and cultural competency that maybe not everyone has.
You've hit on a really important point. There needs to be more diversity and cultural sensitivity within the financial services industry as a whole. Having advisors who truly understand the experiences and the perspectives of Black consumers is crucial if you want to build trust and provide guidance that's actually effective.
This is all giving me a lot to think about. I mean, we've talked about the challenges and the systemic barriers, but it's not all doom and gloom, right? There's a huge opportunity here for financial institutions to step up and do better.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, knowing what we know about this demographic, their values, their priorities, their challenges, how can financial institutions adapt to better serve their needs? It's a big question, but I think it's the right one to be asking.
Okay, I'm ready. What are some things that financial institutions can actually do to create a more inclusive and supportive environment for Black consumers? How can they start breaking down those barriers we've been talking about? Let's brainstorm.
I like it. I think it starts by going deeper than just surface level engagement. Really trying to understand Black consumers on a deeper level.
Okay, but how do you actually do that?
Well, for one thing, it means acknowledging the history of financial inequality in this country. You can't ignore it. And you need to understand how that history continues to affect Black consumers today.
So no more sweeping things under the rug, actually having those tough conversations about systemic issues.
Exactly. It also means being more aware of cultural values and financial priorities, what's important to Black consumers. And then you tailor your products and services to meet those needs.
We talked about how family and community play such a big role in financial decision-making for a lot of Black individuals. How can financial institutions bring that understanding into the services they offer?
That's a great question, and it might take some creativity. Maybe it's developing financial products that work for multi-generational households, or offering financial literacy programs that are designed for Black communities.
So it's about meeting people where they are and finding solutions that actually work for their lives and their circumstances. No more cookie-cutter approaches. But beyond the products and services, there's also the question of representation within the financial institutions themselves, right?
Absolutely. Having more Black financial advisors, Black executives, Black decision makers, that can make a huge difference in terms of building trust and creating an environment where Black consumers feel welcome and included.
So it's not enough to just have a few Black faces in the brochures. Black voices need to be heard at every level of these institutions, from customer service all the way up to the boardroom.
Yeah. Diversity without inclusion is just for show. We need to see real change that empowers Black consumers and makes the system more equitable for everyone. But this isn't just the responsibility of big institutions writing. Individuals have a role to play too.
That's a good point. Creating a more just and equitable world, it takes all of us. That includes when it comes to finances. So what can everyday people do to contribute to this?
So many things. First, just educate yourself. Learn about the racial wealth gap and the systemic barriers that are in place. Learn about how financial inequality affects communities of color.
Knowledge is power, right? The more we understand these issues, the more we can advocate for change.
Right. And don't underestimate the power of your wallet either. Support Black-owned businesses. Invest in companies that are prioritizing diversity and inclusion. Even just having conversations with your friends and family about these issues, it all adds up.
It's a good reminder that it's not always about huge gestures or big policy changes. Changing hearts and minds one conversation at a time, one choice at a time, it can make a difference. This whole conversation has been so insightful. I'm seriously thinking about all of this in a new way.
Me too. And I hope our listeners feeling the same. This study has been really eye-opening for me. I'm seeing the experiences and the challenges faced by Black high net worth individuals in a new light.
It just goes to show, even within a group that's considered successful financially, there's still so much nuance, so much complexity. You can't assume everyone's experience with money is the same. But before we wrap up, I have one last thought I want to leave with our listener. Something to really ponder as they think about everything we've talked about.
Okay, hit me with it.
Imagine a world where financial institutions not only acknowledge the barriers that Black consumers face, but actively work to dismantle them. What would that look like? What would our role be in making that happen? I want our listeners to really think about that as we head into the final part of this deep dive.
That's a powerful question.
Yeah.
And it's one we should all be asking ourselves. We'll dig into those ideas even more in the next part of our episode, so stay tuned.
All right, we're back and ready to wrap up our deep dive. That last question we talked about is really stuck with me. Like, what would it actually take to build a financial system that works for everybody? One that doesn't just acknowledge the barriers, but really works to break them down. I mean, is that even possible?
It's a big challenge, but I don't think it's impossible. I think it starts with changing how we think about things, both on an individual level and on a systemic level.
Okay, so let's break that down. What does a shift in mindset actually look like?
Well, for financial institutions, it means going beyond just transactions and seeing their Black customers as people with real needs and goals.
So not just a market to tap into, but individuals with unique experiences.
Yeah, exactly. Understanding the culture, the history, the challenges that have shaped their relationship with money.
So it's not just about numbers, it's about empowerment and opportunity. A system that helps people build wealth, not just manage what they already have.
That's it, exactly. And it means actually taking action, changing lending practices, making financial education more accessible, creating products and services that meet those needs.
So no more empty promises they need to put their money where their mouth is.
You got it. But it's not just about the big institutions. We all have a role to play here. As individuals, we can educate ourselves about the racial wealth gap and the systemic barriers. We can support businesses owned by Black people, invest in companies that care about diversity and inclusion, even just having conversations with our friends and family.
Love that. It's a reminder that we can all make a difference even in small ways. Choosing where we spend our money, who we bank with, even just talking about these issues, it all adds up.
What's amazing is that when we work to break down these barriers, it's not just helping Black consumers, it helps everyone.
Right. When one group is held back, we all feel it. A rising tide lifts all boats. So making the system fairer for Black consumers makes society as a whole more prosperous and more inclusive.
That's the goal, right? A world where everyone has a fair shot at financial well-being no matter who they are or where they come from.
It starts with awareness, with conversations, with being willing to challenge the status quo. This whole deep dive has been such a learning experience for me. So many insights and things to think about. Hopefully our listeners are feeling the same. A better understanding of the Black high net worth experience and why creating a more equitable financial system is so important for everyone.
I hope so too. I encourage everyone to keep learning, keep talking about these things, and work towards a more just and inclusive future when it comes to finances.
Perfectly said. Thanks for joining us on this deep dive. We'll see you next time.